You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to the Mexican Grand Prix race review on Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners. So, let's be friends. Today, we're reviewing a checks notes, fun and interesting Mexican Grand Prix. No, honestly, that's what it says. That's quite a nice surprise. So coming up, we will, of course, discuss those penalties for Max Verstappen, the championship connotations, why Ferrari continue to baffle and befuddle the field, and that battle with the Mercedes drivers. We are an independent podcast produced in the podcasting shed with the kind permission of our patrons and partners. We aim to bring you a race review before your Monday morning commute. We might be wrong, but we're first. I'm joined in the shed by a more awake than me, Matt Trumpets. Hello, Matt.
Much like the great English explorers, we have discovered the line we believed was there, or at least Max has.
Yeah, so I will say that for this race to have the best storylines, as you Americans like to say, it had to happen again. So either somebody else did the shoving someone off track, or Max did it again and gets away with it, or Max did it again and gets a penalty. But one of those scenarios had to happen for peak drama, and it did. It immediately happened.
Oh, it was great. And it kept on happening the whole race. It was just, maybe it's a racetrack. I don't know. But yeah, they were determined to test the stewards' every last ounce of patience is my general take.
And from Canada, we have Christina Lee Mace. Hello, Christina.
Hello. I have to say, if someone decided to take a shot anytime karma happened this race, they'd have a pretty fun game on their hands.
Yeah, it's just, but you couldn't have scripted it. Like, you had to have Verstappen basically do it again and see what the steward's reaction would be and the internet's reaction would be.
We knew that he would do it again. He's been doing it for years. It's like clockwork at this point.
Okay, so we are obviously going to start with that incident where we had basically a nearly a carbon copy as a second incident between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. So the first one, Lando Norris is round the outside, gets to the apex first, and then is deemed to have been shoved off track by Max Verstappen. Then we have Max Verstappen as the overtaking car into the next corner, also not ahead at the apex. Both cars go off track. This time, Max Verstappen comes out ahead and is deemed to have gained a lasting advantage. Does this make any sense? It feels like there was a different set of stewards. So were these set of stewards, Matt, trying to make a point?
Yes, in fact, I believe they were. First of all, we had different stewards this week than last. But more importantly, there was a very long drivers' meeting in which the drivers expressed their opinions about what happened last week, and being communicated through the Formula One TV comms. But the general consensus was the majority of drivers felt like what Max did deserved a penalty last week. And then you also had the McLaren appeal. And now the stewards just chucked it out because it was circular in its reasoning. But they seem to me to be hinting in the decision that, like, well, we take it that you have a point here, but you've simply presented it in a way that leaves us no immediate way to act on it. But if you look at what happened today, I think they very clearly took what McLaren had to say to heart, along with the drivers. And we now have potentially better racing in our future.
Yeah. This is sort of the thing that we've been waiting to happen. And the thing that frustrates me the most is that if the teams and drivers had banded together earlier on and had said something, we potentially could have had very different looking championships, better looking wheel-to-wheel racing, because maybe they would have reviewed these rules, regulations, cleared it up sooner. It's super frustrating when a problem that you can see coming a mile away, you have to wait for it to reach a boiling point. Like, we the people knew that this was a problem for ages, and the fact that teams and drivers are only now getting to it is frustrating.
It's very Formula One, though. Because let's face it, up through 2021, the only other team that was going to be affected by this in any real or meaningful way was Mercedes. In the meantime, why would I complain about a problem Mercedes is having? Because that might be benefiting me. It's such a Formula One mentality, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So Lewis Hamilton, before the race, the way he was talking about 2021 was as if no one had noticed. So he was going, did you see what happened in Korea? Yeah, that same thing happened to me. Did you? I don't know if you remember, but in 2021, and he was like, but nobody talks about it. Mr. Hamilton, we were all talking about it. So this is kind of my theme with Verstappen, because during the aftermath of last week, people were really talking about, oh no, Verstappen's just a genius at exploiting those grey areas. He really understood the rules, and he knew that if he let off the brakes and he was ahead at the apex and that he didn't get overtaken, then he would end up, keeping the place and the other person would be penalised. And something we didn't manage to pick up on in the last show, which we found by looking at the telemetry, because I'm now a telemetry expert, Matt, because I found one website and I've been playing on it a lot. I think what was it? It was f1-tempo.com.
Yeah, F1 Tempo.
Yeah, really useful site, and it's all clear and concise, and the only thing you can't see is the brake pressure, but you can see if the brakes are on and off, but you can see speed, you can see all the traces, and you saw from that Verstappen just didn't accelerate out of turn 12, I think it was, at Circuit of the Americas.
Yeah.
And that you go, oh, that's pretty smart. I think he's played the referee there. Norris just gets on it. Here, I would argue that Lando Norris and McLaren really looked at what was going on last week, and they played the referee. So there's two incidents. So the first one is the getting forced off wide. That's why Verstappen got the penalty, because Lando was ahead at the apex and then he got forced off. The second one was because, again, Verstappen was the overtaking car, not ahead at the apex, and forced him off. But this is the most interesting one to me, Matt. Last time, Norris pinned it to stay ahead. This time, neither of them accelerated. So they were both really aware that if you overtake off track, you're gaining a lasting advantage. And they slowed down so much that Leclerc just came piling through.
Yeah, he must have been so happy to see that open door at that moment. But again, this is the thing. The battle in everybody's mind now, I'm not saying it's the real battle. We can argue about that later. But the battle in everybody's mind now is Norris chasing the championship. And so that means Max and Norris are locked together, sometimes to the exclusion of doing their absolute optimum during the race.
Yeah, so Verstappen has this advantage on Saturday at the moment. So he's going to keep out qualifying that car. Like, that car is clearly the third best car, depending on what Mercedes do. So Mercedes have got like a 20-sided dice that decides their pace for the weekend. They just roll it and they're like, it's an 8 today. I guess we're going to kind of suck this weekend. But I think they could roll a 20, and that could put Red Bull back to the fourth. But Verstappen keeps qualifying P1, P2. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's relentless, Christina, and that form is going to keep him being a pain in the arse for Norris.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things that you really do hope that McLaren and Norris are kind of on top of, because they can have good qualifying days.
Prove it.
You know that they
Give
can.
examples.
Norris has multiple, he has 7 or 8 poles this season alone.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah.
Like, they can qualify well, but it's just a matter of not just Norris qualifying well, but also having buffer space between him and Verstappen. Because even though he can get on pole, his race starts are abysmal.
Well, they're
not
medium,
great,
aren't they, at best?
Yeah. And it's all cheeky and fun for him to say the very good point of, it doesn't matter if you are ahead at the first turn. It matters if you're ahead at the checkered flag, which, yes, fair point. But also, you do make your life easier if you can be ahead at turn 1. So yes, him succeeding throughout the rest of the season will be as much dependent on him doing well as it will on other teams doing well and Verstappen struggling that little bit. It's really going to be a large effort, team effort, especially to beat Verstappen or even get close.
Yeah, and this is where I have to reluctantly tip my hat to Verstappen for this year and 2021. He is so difficult to pass. So whether or not you agree with the stewards' rulings, him and Red Bull have been completely brutal when it comes to defending. And you go, okay, well, leave it to the stewards to make a decision. So, for example, was it Qatar in 2021, where he didn't want to be ahead at the DRS line, so he just completely lifted off the brakes on a straight and Hamilton hit him. You go, well, there's barely any other scenario where that doesn't result in a penalty or at least a black and white flag. You know, the multiple sort of running off, the squatting on top of Hamilton's head at Monza and spinning up the wheels while you're on top of his head. All those kind of things, you go, it just shows this absolute ruthless aggression. And it's not up to Verstappen to make the decisions. It's not up to Verstappen to decide what the stewards should penalise or not. But now we're in a championship fight. We haven't seen this in 22. We didn't really see it in 23. But now it's a full-on championship fight, Matt. They are going to keep kicking like the back end of a donkey. And if he can pick, right, okay, we're probably going to be behind McLaren anyway. Let's pick a quali setup. Let's make sure we're ahead. Let's make sure that we have a say in that fight. And every single time, he's going to block the inside. Norris is going to try and take it on the outside. And we're going to have this kind of fight. We've got 4 more weekends of this.
Yeah, but again, Max's main job at this point is just to finish in the place behind Norris. That's all. I mean, even today, where he finished 6th to Norris 2nd, Norris still didn't gain enough points for the races left to actually catch him. So his job is an easy one. The thing that strikes me about the Red Bull is it's kind of like strength and cardio. You know, your cardio goes fast, but your strength really sticks around. Well, I think for cars, strength is your 1 lap pace, at least for Red Bull. That's going to be the last thing to leave that car. When that goes, you know, they're in real trouble. Until then, they've at least got a fighting chance. And I agree with you. Max has absolutely saved the team's bacon with his driving. Whether you like him or not, you cannot argue with the amount of skill he's shown this year in piloting that car.
All right, Macy, you are the stewards. What did you make of the decisions, the penalties that came out of that?
They make sense. At the end of the day, he was driving like a bit of a knob at that point. Oof. We knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to exploit the rules. And okay, fair point. But you still have to do that with a certain amount of grace and control. And this time he did not do that. He kind of just proved the own point of why we need to change the regulations, because it's one thing where it's a debatable penalty, where you're looking at something like Austin and where you understand the logic of, okay, yes, ahead at the apex, that is what the rule is. Okay, I still don't agree with that penalty, but at least you can understand some logic to it. And then you get situations like what we saw this time around, and it just looks like he's driving like a madman. Whether or not he was in control of his car or not is kind of besides the point, but it does not look like he was. It looks like he was kind of just hucking it across the track left, right, and center kind of a thing. And that's the point where you're kind of looking at it going, yeah, someone absolutely has to penalize that, because that's not racing. It's not entertaining to watch, because at the end of the day, it's just it wasn't fun to watch that racing, because it didn't feel like he was trying to go wheel to wheel with Norris.
No, yeah.
It felt like he was just trying to drive someone off track.
Yeah, so like in 2021, none of those encounters between Hamilton and Verstappen were good. None of them were really good racing. They ended kind of very quickly. And the whole point of this shoving people off track that a lot of racers don't like is it means that the whole confrontation is over in one turn. If you had to leave space, like a lot of drivers voluntarily left space, you would get this multi-corner action. And if you look at, say, for example, like Russell and Hamilton having a little inter-team fight, there was a lot of really good racing there, getting your nose alongside, people leaving room, leaving space. So Verstappen has driven in a way that I think is consistent to the way he drives. So a lot of the stuff was, he knows, he's an expert at getting into the grey areas. He's an expert at finding out the grey areas. But those grey areas didn't exist in 2021, and he still did them. the grey areas did exist in COTA, and you kind of go, oh, well, he was ahead at the apex, so technically, let's ignore the fact that Article 33.4 says that you shouldn't drive in a way that endangers people or is erratic. Let's ignore all that, because document 2 of the driver standards, Précy, said, oh no, technically it didn't say what the defending car has to do, but obviously the rest of the rules say you have to stay on track when defending. But as he's been doing that, that's not him exploiting a grey area, because today he didn't exploit the grey areas. Yeah, he didn't. He did the same thing he does all the time, but it just happened to fall outside of the grey areas. It just so happened that this time it was indisputable that he was behind both apexes. But this isn't. Let's get this out of our heads, that this is Verstappen somehow being a genius at exploiting these rules and loopholes, because he didn't today. Today he got completely gamed by Lando Norris. Stop me if I'm being wrong here, but Lando Norris today did exactly what Martin Brundle was suggesting on the commentary for the Circuit of the Americas. He also lifted off the brake. He made sure he was ahead at the apex. I'm not entirely certain that he was going to make the turn, but there was no intention to. You don't need to, because you knew Max was going to run you off. So as long as you're ahead at the apex, and as long as you don't go too far off, as long as you make it look like you've been fouled, that's absolutely fine. So he's not an expert at exploiting the grey areas. It's just people are just anomaly hunting around that. So I actually think, though, that the penalties were harsh, Matt, and I think this is where I might disagree with you, or we may disagree.
Well, yeah. If you'll recall, the move, especially for the gaining an advantage penalty, has been to increase it, because so many people were just accepting the 5 seconds and just disappearing 20 seconds up on the road.
Cheers, easy.
And so in that sense, I think it's a fair increase to keep people from doing that. But to me, really, absolutely justified for the second incident, because Max just simply drove through the turn to off the track with, it really looked like, his apex was going to be the other side of the curb before he even bothered to try and make it. And that was more of the dangerous one than the first one.
If Norris had gone, okay, well, I'll just keep my foot in like he did in COTA, then you would argue that it was Norris that had maintained the advantage because he kept the place by going off track. But here's my thing. Why did Norris get 5 seconds when he could have got 10 seconds in Circuit of the Americas, and then Verstappen got 10 seconds for essentially the same thing? Cristina.
We do know why. And it was essentially because the stewards said they understood that he essentially had to go off track because he was being forced there, and that's why he got the advantage. So they did acknowledge the circumstance around it, saying, you know what, you were put in a tough situation of avoid a collision. If not, we would have given you the 10 seconds. But to me, I would have much preferred that they give Norris the 10 seconds and Verstappen the 5.
Yeah.
Because then it's discouraging both bad behaviors.
Yes.
You have to either give both of them a penalty or neither of them a penalty. It's either they both did something bad or it's a racing incident.
So a lot of Verstappen fans, because, on my Twitter, it does come out as, me supporting the British person versus the Verstappen fans. When I was saying Verstappen should get a 5-second penalty for forcing Norris off track, the comeback was, well, Norris should have got a 10-second penalty. You go, fine, that is fine. Because yes, it wouldn't have changed the result, but at least we set that precedence that you're not just allowed to ram people off.
Yeah. And this is the thing, because there were 2 incidents. There was the gaining the advantage incident, but then there was also forcing the other driver off track. And that was the missing piece of the puzzle from last week.
But also the forcing off track today. So for the first incident where Norris got to the apex first, if that had ended up being a 5-second penalty, I think that would have been fine as well. I don't think anyone would have really argued with that one. I think that would have seemed reasonable. So yeah, you forced him off. You weren't ahead at the apex. So here's a 5-second penalty. I don't think many people would have complained about that, but they went for the 10. And so overall, it doesn't feel quite proportionate. The overall feeling is almost like this set of stewards was angry at last week's set of stewards. I don't know if it was a completely different one, but it almost seemed like this correction of like, well, we don't like what happened last week, so we're really going to drive this home. I just think, Matt, that Red Bull have a tiny bit of a case that they really had the whole book thrown at them, and they're not used to it.
Oh, no, they're definitely not used to it, at least judging by their radio transmissions. But I feel like you also have to take into account the fact that he collected these penalties 1 minute apart. Like, I'm looking at the decision documents, it's 1420, 1421. It may have played on the stewards that essentially this was a second act in an ongoing series of transgressions. And that might have also prompted them to say, hey, look, you know what, we really, we need to tell all the other drivers we're going to enforce things this way. But we also need to tell Max that, dude, we are on to you.
So the stewards are the referees, and they kind of have become personalities in themselves. And without naming names, but I think we all know who we're referring to, Toto Wolff definitely is referencing one particular steward who has been outwardly a Verstappen fan and may have a vested interest in Verstappen and seems to always be involved when controversial decisions go Verstappen's way. But today there was a steward who has been also very, very vocally pro Hamilton and maybe a little bit anti Verstappen. And you might even argue that that's why he's not on TV anymore, but who's a broadcaster that I loved. But these personalities in the steward's office are having a really profound effect on the sport. And it's like there's an internal steward war. So I will say today, like, I'm so glad Verstappen got that penalty, and any driver who did that should get that penalty. However, I'm not sure it shows the sport in a particularly healthy light. If it was 5 seconds, even 5 seconds, 10 seconds, I think I'd feel a little bit more like the balance was correct.
Mm-hmm. And the couple big frustrating parts, and this is me being incredibly pedantic, and I absolutely love it because I'm a big rules and regulations person. I like reading it. I like having everything laid out.
Yeah. Organization. You have binders. Yeah.
I love it. I love being told exactly how something is going to go. And I think it's very frustrating for fans that we don't have access to these driving codes. So we don't actually know what the rules are. We don't know how they're written out. So we can't actually have a lot of good discussions about them because we don't know what's going on. And the few times that I have seen screen grabs of parts of the document, it's written like a complete and utter hot mess. There's grammatical errors for one. And then it also, the biggest thing is that a lot of the times, even if there are rules like, oh, you have to get ahead at the apex first, it doesn't make it clear when other rules supersede that. It doesn't make it clear that that does not matter if you're doing it in a dangerous way. It does not matter if you do it by getting off track, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's so incredibly frustrating. No wonder we're getting inconsistent penalties and moments like this. The rules are written in a way that would confuse just about anyone.
And I think like lawyers would pretty much drive a bus through most of the gaps in those regulations. So one of the big defenses coming from Sky TV was, well, actually, the rules only talk about the overtaking car. It's like, yeah, because they're overtaking rules. So they're rules for overtaking. Oh, when the outside car does this, they should do this. If you're overtaking on the inside, you should do this. And then you can be like, technically, actually, it doesn't say what the defending car should do. But you go, but that doesn't mean they can pull out a machine gun or start like dropping marbles in front of you go, wow, there's nothing in the regs that says the inside car can't just throw ball bearings in front of the attacking car.
Well, and let's remind ourselves that a lot of what we're addressing here aren't rules. They are guidelines to assist the stewards in assigning blame when there are on-track incidents. So there are rules in the International Sporting Code and in the sporting regulations of Formula One that are actual rules that the drivers are required to adhere to. They're very broad. So these are specific guidelines just for Formula One to sort of help the stewards, many of whom are not necessarily drivers or haven't driven at this level, come to a conclusion about who's at fault and whether anyone should be, in fact, at fault. And I feel like the writing it down like that has actually made it worse because they become sort of target fixated on like the apex. Who's ahead at the
Exactly,
apex?
so
Well, no,
dumb.
watch. Lando's ahead in the braking zone. Max pulls ahead at the apex, but then Lando's back ahead as they go off track. It's a dynamic situation, and you need to step back and look at it like a forest occasionally and not just a leaf on a tree.
The Missed Apex lawyers have asked me to clarify that I was not saying that there's any suggestion of race fixing, simply that the personalities have overcome and kind of dominated the media conversation. That in itself might be an issue. And I was using that to highlight what I feel like seems like a reaction to last week's stewarding. Of course, that is all very, very subjective. So I think I would like to go into a couple of similar situations to this with other drivers, a couple of other racing incidents. And I would like to ask,
Whose fault is it?
whose fault is it? There's a few whose fault is it this time? All right, cool. So the ones I want to go through are Colapinto versus Lawson, and Tsunoda versus Albon, and Perez versus Lawson as well. Now, I don't want anyone to think that just because Lawson hit two of my favorite drivers, that there's going to be any bias. I will be completely fair. And also, I don't want to forget that Ferrari won this race. So, again, like last week, Paul Leclerc's win was completely overshadowed by the shenanigans. I think less so this week, but I wanted to get to the argument point. Of course, we will be celebrating my favorite team's victory at the Mexican Grand Prix. So, I want to start with Tsunoda versus Albon right at the beginning, because I was so surprised. I put my opinion of it in the Discord, and they're normally really brilliant, intelligent people in our Patreon Discord, because they're the best ones. They're the ones that signed up at patreon.com/Missed Apex to support this independent venture. However, most of them were wrong in saying it was Tsunoda's fault. So, Cristina, whose fault was it?
Do I have to pick someone whose fault it is, or can I just do the cop out of like, it's not actually anyone's fault?
No, you absolutely cannot do that. That is against the whole ethos of this entire project. I'd rather you murdered me than spat on my grave than call it a racing incident. So, whose fault was it?
My goodness. If I have to pick somebody, I will pick Tsunoda, just because he was able to see. He had the best visibility of the situation.
Well,
He
that's
was
not
the one coming
unreasonable.
from the farthest back. He was able to see that, eep, this is a skinny, mini little spot. He would have been the one in the best position to notice, ooh, we've touched once. There's probably someone on the other side of him. Would have been a good thought to have or to consider. It would have been wisest of him to back out. I mean, Albon and Gasly very well may have hit it anyway, but at least Yuki would be safe.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Senna is not happy. I can feel the spirit of Ayrton Senna just like yelling at me, just like, tell Macy she's wrong. There was a gap. What, you want Tsunoda to no longer be a racing driver?
There was a gap, but it was the smallest gap. And I appreciated him going for it at the beginning. But the moment his car started tapping on Albon's, I would have said, okay, you can see that that's happening. It may have been wiser to pull back.
Now, you and me, Matt, we've been involved in our fair share of lap one incidents in our racing and karting. I don't think wild horses could have dragged me out of going for that gap, especially in Mexico. You get a slipstream, you get a run, there is space, and you want to say, don't go for it. I'm really struggling to fathom that.
You're going to like what I have to say, because if it's anyone's fault, it's not Tsunoda's. Man was flying straight on the outside. Albon knew he was there. But I think I'm going to surprise a lot of people when I tell you whose fault it actually was.
Oh, well, Ocon's teammate by any chance?
Indeed.
Predictable.
Ooh.
And I know a lot of people are going to go, wait, what? But to be fair,
Agenda
I didn't
much?
immediately assume that it was his fault. It was only the second or third time I watched a replay of the start, and I became increasingly convinced what you had was Tsunoda on the outside, you had Albon next to him, and Gasly was coming across the track. He couldn't see that Albon had Tsunoda to the outside, and he thought, naturally, that Albon had room to accommodate his, not huge, but his motion across track. The reality is Albon had no room at all, ticked Yuki's rear wheel, and bang, the whole chain reaction got set off. So because Gasly had the most room and he was the one moving, he's the one that I would hold at fault here.
Your Honor, can I approach the bench? So if Gasly's not at fault because he didn't realise that it was 3 wide, then surely Tsunoda could use that same logic and say he wouldn't have expected Albon to just dance across and hit him twice.
See, Trumpets Rule 37B, the last person to the party in a 3 wide is generally the one at fault. But in this case, I'm saying it is Gasly's fault.
So in the first tap, I can sort of see that. So the first tap, Tsunoda was behind. But the second contact, the second time Albon came across, Tsunoda was already like ahead. It was Tsunoda's rear to Albon's front. So I'm really, really struggling how the car on the outside in a straight line is at fault for the car behind moving left into him. I don't get it.
It's because it wasn't Tsunoda's fault. He was the only blameless party in this whole thing. We're trying to wind up Cristina here, but she's just ignoring us to make mean TikToks.
Oh, I have Cat here.
Oh, sorry. Aww.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to disappoint everyone. There's a much more wholesome reason why I'm kind of spaced out for just the briefest moment. I'm not always thinking about you two.
Okay.
Come on.
But given that we're doing a show about Formula One, I'll ask Squeaks his opinion later on. But yeah, no, I was so disappointed with that one, Matt, because you just kind of go, I get it. I get a lot of people saying, well, he should have backed out. But I mean, show me the example of a driver on the starting line just stopping. You know, and you can't, how many accidents have you and me caused by being cautious from the lights to turn 1 and then someone's up behind? You know, they can't always do that either.
No, you can't. And really, the only way you could put this on Tsunoda is if you could, from his onboard, see not only was it going to be just like clearly Albon leaving him as little room as possible, but you could also clearly see Gasly coming over and knowing that you're driving into a space that was likely to disappear. But that just isn't how it happened. He was halfway, more than halfway by Albon when Gasly came over and gave Albon the squeeze from Albon's right side. And it was just a question of, was it going to be Gasly or Tsunoda that actually got hit by Albon, who was doing his best to back out of it? No, actually, I think Gasly did take his right front off.
So this is like the closest to a no-blame situation. So I do sympathize with your heretic position, Cristina, that you tried to take. I think my overwhelming thing would be Tsunoda's going straight in a straight line down the left. Albon's going straight just to the right of Tsunoda's line. Gasly decides to move into Albon. And Albon goes, right, that is now my problem. I'm going to make it Tsunoda's problem by moving left. But if he'd have just stayed in a straight line and Gasly hit him, obviously that's not ideal for Albon. I mean, he ended up going out anyway. But if he stays in a straight line and Gasly hits him, it's definitely Gasly's fault. There's no doubt about that. But then Albon decided to go, well, I'll also go and collect Tsunoda, which I think makes it a bit Albon's fault.
Yeah, except for my memory of the onboard is it's Albon's front right that got trashed, and that would be the one that came into contact with Gasly. I think Gasly and he did have contact. I just don't know if it was after the Tsunoda contact or not.
Okay, how do we feel about these incidents not being punished? So I think there was stuff in Kota as well, lap 1, turn 1. I still think the rules should apply on a straight. So I think if you do move over and swipe people out on a straight, I don't like this lap 1 leniency. The rules are just the rules.
You know what? I'm okay with it, at least in this instance. I'm okay with the stewards being willing to allow it from time to time because it's a massively complicated information space and everything's happening at an incredibly rapid speed. And there can be factors that are literally happen beyond your ability to comprehend that come into play when it comes to these sorts of things. So there are times where like turn 12, lap 1, Sainz and Verstappen. No, I wouldn't accept a lap 1 argument for that at Kota. But this one, I'd be willing to say that, yeah, it was just sort of complicated. Nobody intended to do anything. It was just bad luck for Yuki that it turned out the way it did. And Albon.
All right. We'll call it a draw. Do you have a view? I think we do Lawson was really in the wars. So Lawson is in a kind of death struggle at the moment. And actually, it looks like it's like medium stressing it out. He's not being very Piastri-like. He's not being super cool. He looks like he's in a fight. And in the track, he looks like he's in a fight. In the interviews, he looks like he's like stressed about those situations. There's a lot of pressure. You could probably argue kind of this is almost like do or die for his career. But he was in a couple of incidents. So firstly, Cristina, the absolute the hitting of Colapinto, which no one should be allowed to do.
That one very much to me just it screams Colapinto. It's his first couple of races in Formula One. It screams very much, okay, he understood that he needed to get back on track, but he kind of did not take the second to think, right, I need to be careful of where I come back on track. So to me, I wouldn't have given Colapinto a penalty. I would have given him a warning of just, that was a bad idea. Not a good idea. Don't do that again. And see where it goes from there at the end of the day.
So
but
black and white.
Yeah. That's my little take on it.
So again, we have to look at the stupid ahead at the apex rules, which I hate doing, but I guess we have to do that. So in that, you go, Lawson wasn't ahead, therefore should have given Colapinto room. And then so when Colapinto's coming back on track, you go, okay, but they're naturally moving out to the right. And here's where there's a little bit of disagreement between right-left turns. So as you know, Matt, I got in a massive debate with Kyle because on a right-hander, I basically ushered him off track and then I didn't let him back on. And he's like, well, you should have followed the natural line for the next turn, which was back out to the right. But I just stayed in a straight line and went, well, I didn't have to. And that's kind of what Lawson did after Colapinto went off track. He was like, well, I didn't have to give you room. Yeah, but also there's loads of room to the right and you wouldn't have lost your front wing if you'd have given room.
Yeah, I don't think Colapinto meant to hit. My memory is that he hit a curb and it sort of caused him to understeer into Lawson's wing, but I could be misremembering that. I think Kyle's actual response was pure filth.
He called me pure filth repeatedly and loudly. I've never heard Kyle get so angry. I've got the footage, by the way. I've got the footage. So in fact, I have to put that footage out. I'll try and get it out on social media tomorrow so you guys can do a whose fault it is between me and Kyle.
I do like that. And I think Justin in our chat is making the very good point that if we're talking about blame, sorry to go back to Tsunoda for a second, but if we're talking about blaming anyone for that incident, Tsunoda clearly was first to the apex at turn one. So how can it be his fault?
Yeah, but he went gearbox first. That's it. Oh, don't. I was so sad. After the high of Tsunoda winning 4-0, because he's 4-0 up against Lawson in qualifying. You can argue about the methods. You can argue whether deliberately causing a red flag.
Finishes.
No, I'm still arguing
just
Saturday.
Qualifying. It's the only thing that matters. That's where all the points are.
Thank you. Thanks for acknowledging that. 4-0 to Yuki. Let's go. Let's get that Honda-inspired test at Red Bull going. So I think, to me, that is one where you go, I actually think Lawson was technically at fault. And then you go, he could have just survived that and not had to get a front wing. So it's that kind of thing of, well, you cross the road. Is there a zebra crossing equivalent in America where the car is meant to give way to the pedestrian? And you go, yeah, okay. But if a car is like, speeding,
clearly doesn't see you coming, then
you might be technically correct, but you've still got a broken leg and a neck collar at the end. So maybe not the smartest move from Lawson. But the Lawson Red Bull one was interesting, Matt, because you seem to think incorrectly that was all fair and above board and good racing.
I do actually think that. And I will take my hat off to Lawson. I know a lot of people are going to be looking at, oh, whatever, he had a crash, blah, blah, blah. But the reality of it is he was racing Perez extremely well and coming in. So this is a 2-turn incident that we're about to discuss, another left righter. So coming into that, he does the exact thing that Brad taught me to do, which is leave your opponent as little room as possible, whatever side they pick, coming into the turn. So he narrows the entry for Perez. Perez drives almost entirely off track. is behind at the apex and takes Lawson off, but then goes on to leave him room. Lawson comes back on, the battle continues into the next corner. And there, I mean, like, I did look at it again, and Perez just drives himself off track, is really what it amounts to. And then ultimately yields the place.
That's funny, because the way I see it is that Perez went for a dive bomb. Like, to me, that's a classic dive bomb, and he didn't make it. He didn't even make the... So it wasn't they're side by side and then he lifts off the brake like Verstappen was doing. It was just brake late enough so that you try and arrive at the apex first.
Thank you for reminding me of that, because the lateness of the move actually got mentioned in the document where they ultimately go on not to hold anyone accountable for anything.
But that's I actually think they both deserve a penalty for that. So he just doesn't brake, arrives at the apex too late to claim it under the new rules, and then shoves Lawson off. So to me, that's a clear penalty. If Verstappen's going to get the 10-second penalty earlier, then Perez also 10-second penalty. I don't see any difference.
Well, this is what I like about it, though. This is where I will chapeau to the stewards, because it continued on to turn 5 and Perez allowed him racing room. When Perez went off track the next time and came back on behind him, they basically said at that point he yielded the position, which shouldn't have been his because he gained an unfair advantage taking Lawson off track. So that's it.
But I don't think
there's no penalty because he ultimately gave the position back to Lawson.
But I also think that even if he wanted to stay on track, Lawson was stopping him staying on track anyway. And what was great, Cristina, as well, is like they are fighting for that Red Bull seat, and they were not like, this is like Albon. Oh, they're racing me so hard, but they really are competing for a seat.
I was hooting and hollering at that entire fight because it's exactly what you want to see. You know that they're directly fighting for the exact same seat. I think we know who's going to win out, knock on wood. Don't want to jinx anything, but I think we know who's going to win out at the end of the day. But still, getting to see them directly go wheel to wheel was so satisfying, so fun. I do wish that it could have been done with a little bit more finesse and a little bit less clunkiness. I was reminded watching this, and that's not a dig at their driving. That's specifically a dig at, oh my goodness, these cars are really big. And this track is so narrow. That was kind of, their driving and getting close to the edge or going off the edge. So much of it did not feel like, oh, they're not leaving enough room, but more so, right, this track is so skinny that the reasonable amount of leaving room any other place on the calendar, and this would have been perfectly fine. But because this track is so tiny, so skinny, mini, you wind up with these interactions, these racing moments that look just so silly because there just isn't room for these massive cars.
Clumsy is really the correct word.
I think clunky described it just fine. No, it looked like a scrappy battle, and I think between those two, neither of them kind of were cool about it. So I think we've definitely seen the coolness veneer drop from Lawson. Perez is being really kind of, no, I'm definitely staying here. I'll definitely be here next year. Like, he literally said, like, I'll definitely be here next year. And no one else thinks that except his dad. So his dad was in the press going, oh no, he'll be fine. He's going to be world champion. Like,
all I have to say about that is my mom at one point thought that I was going to be an engineer. She has done the sensible thing and let go of that dream, as many parents I'm sure have. My child's going to be a doctor, a lawyer. Well, we can't all be doctors and lawyers. And that's okay.
The world needs interesting people too.
Wait a minute. Yep. Whoa, hang on a minute. You're saying I'm wrong because I've been telling V that she's going to be a journalist and then prime minister. So
no. Your child is the exception. Of course, your child is the exception, Spanners.
Thank you, Cristina. You did have me scared for a second there. Yeah, a scrappy fight between Lawson and Perez, but I think we can't really leave that without talking about what a disastrous weekend that was for Perez overall. Did he finish? I think at one point, Cristina, I saw that he made an overtake for 16th to avoid being last of the runners, and you go, oh, don't show that on camera. Just have pity. Just leave it alone.
A couple of my friends actually were trackside, and looks like they had a fantastic time. But she also started posting almost immediately at the start of the race, just going, oh my gosh, everyone's leaving.
Really?
Because
Oh, no.
enough people in her section were just choosing to leave because Perez had dropped down all the way to the back pretty much right from the get-go because of his penalty. So it definitely wasn't the weekend he wanted. And I I laugh because of how absolutely insane and ridiculous it is. But last year we saw him get out of the race in a dramatic fashion, lap one, turn one. And then this year, he doesn't make it out of Q1. And in fact, technically finishes the race, but maybe it would have been kinder to just retire him. It's definitely disappointing, definitely something that, would have been nice for him to just have even a top 10 finish instead of, oh boy, you feel that it's his home race and that this is 2 for 2.
Yeah.
How lackluster it's been.
Brad, I've just seen Brad's tweet where he summarized Perez's weekend out in Q1. Ouch. Missed his start box, crashes into another Red Bull team driver, runs another driver off the road, moans about everything under the sun, finishes 17th, silences the haters. Yeah, that is an absolutely disastrous weekend. And yeah, the Red Bull is struggling. So there's a slight caveat with that. But then, Max Verstappen not only finished 6th, but also qualified in P2.
What is so unbelievably frustrating about all of this is that he got himself up to 13th place at the start. And even with the 5-second penalty, he was on for some points. But just the way he went about his business and the contact that ensued from that meant that his day was done because he had a massive hole in his side pod. So, I mean, it was bad enough they had to bring him in and give him extra tires. I think it was affecting the handling of the car that badly. And then when they went to go for a fast lap at the end, and I don't mean to make you feel bad, but this is just a literal thing that happened.
Oh, we're beyond that. Don't worry.
When they said they were going to pull Perez in for fast lap, my wife, who has unbelievably after all these years taken to watching sports with me again, my wife laughed out loud when they said they were going to call him in for fast lap. She just laughed. She's like, why? That's so, they're being so mean to him.
Yeah, I think the interest level in general in Formula One, by the way, has really picked up. So I think people who had a passing interest in it, who might have like friends who are F1 fans, they're suddenly starting to really get back into it. So my family has kind of picked up on this championship race and they were all gathered around, behind me. And I was quite surprised. It's like, oh, you have been kind of all paying attention to little bits and bobs. And so, this F1 season is really coming alive. And we've spent all this time talking about the championship protagonists, and in Kota and in here, and in this race, the battle between Norris and Verstappen, which we'll talk about the maths of it at the end, has totally overshadowed the fact that we had 2 Ferrari winners in the last 2 races, that Ferrari have won a half the races since the summer break, and I'm just recovering still, Matt, from you on the last race review, telling me that Ferrari had no upgrades and that they could have just been doing this the whole time. But Carlos Sainz went and won the Mexican Grand Prix. Not fluke, not a cars going out in front of him. There was no extenuating circumstances whatsoever. Carlos Sainz just absolutely bossed and dominated this weekend.
Oh, yeah, he did. And I know he didn't get the best start, but man, that move that he put on Max into turn 1, I was talking about with Cristina before the show. I saw that coming and I'm like, there's no way he's going to keep that car on track. And he did. And I think he surprised himself so much he almost drove off track at the next turn. He's like, oh, wait, what? Oh, I'm in front. Where's Max? Oh, yeah, right. Turns. Got to do that. Got to do the steering wheel turn thing. It was someone who knew they wanted to win and were absolutely good. He just it was just sparkling to watch.
And I think he made that point of, well, everyone around me has more to lose than I do, and I can just go for it. And I completely buy that, because you're right, going down the straight, it felt like it was, he was about the same distance from Verstappen as Hamilton was on occasion from Russell. And whereas Hamilton was like, no, I'm not going to just yeet my teammate off track, Sainz did just go, do you know what? What if I just don't brake quite yet? What if I just send it and worry about it later?
They showed it at the end of the race. They showed the replay of that move, and he pulls out and is side by side with Verstappen. And I'm seeing the 50-meter board approaching, and I'm just like, how? How
Yeah.
did you get the car stopped in that amount of time? And turned, I just really, it was a very special moment. You don't usually that's straight across the front of Max and then back on track behind him.
But it reminds me of Piastri in Baku, and then in the cool down room, he went, I was about 50-50 on that, whether that would work. Because if you don't hear from them, you go, oh, it looks all like controlled. It looks like this great move. But, we've been in that position in a sim or karting, which is the same as F1, and you hit the brakes and you're just not sure. And then you win the position on the corner, and then, but he didn't really look like he was fighting it too much. I think once he made the decision on the braking point, it was under control and he got it done. But there was a big pace advantage with that Ferrari in the hands of Carlos Sainz. And I think this is the thing for me, Christina, is that it's not just winning the race, it's being so dominant over Leclerc this weekend.
It was beautiful. And we're getting a lot of quotes from him, and it's very much feeling like, not just from him, but from a couple other drivers as well, kind of like that senior that's about to graduate and that's looking back, but also looking forward. Oh, you're going to a new phase, bittersweet, but also, F it, they can't expel me anymore. What's going to happen? I'm going for it. And it's kind of amazing. So you're getting quotes from Sainz basically saying, I put so much time and effort into helping this team improve. And what? Now I have to go and do that again with Williams? Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Happy for you, but also, are you kidding me? So it's also just nice seeing him go and reach those last moments of, I'm fighting at the front of the grid. Dang straight, I'm going to fight at the front of the grid.
So his quote was like, oh, I've worked with this Ferrari team, and now just as it's about to become a championship winning car, I won't be involved and I won't get to win in it, is basically his thing. And you go, okay, I get that. And that's an easy thing to say on a weekend, which has been an uptick for you, which is a spike for you, where you've put it on pole and then you've won. And he's definitely capable of those kind of weekends. But also, most of the time, that isn't the case. Even if he qualifies ahead of Leclerc, most of the time, Leclerc has the pace. So if it's a championship winning car with him and Leclerc, I mean, wouldn't most people agree that Leclerc would be the big favourite to win out of those two? So it's kind of like, oh, yeah, but if you were here next year, it feels like you'd just be watching Leclerc win the championship. But, I mean, he's right. Of course, there would be a chance for him to win it. I don't know how much sympathy I have, Matt. I don't know how much I'm buying into, well, I would be world champion next year, which is kind of the implication.
I don't know that he'd be world championship, but in general, whenever I've looked at the points gap between teammates, it's been smallest between the two of them. And that's
60
bearing in
points.
mind that he...
But coming into the weekend, 60.
Well, going out is what I have now, and it's 51.
But the going in suits my narrative better. So maybe we
but
could
he
just
also
focus on that.
missed a race, and I haven't bothered to count up the DNFs.
No.
But it's irrelevant. Yeah, no one would argue with you that on ultimate pace Leclerc is faster. But Carlos,
I also think he was talking about the Constructors' Championship. I don't think he's that level of delusional that he thinks that he would be the one that they would back for the Drivers' Championship. Barring Leclerc having some, random DNFs, I think that he understands what his role was to play.
I think there is an element of truth to that, because they are team players, aren't they? Both. And this is why I'm sort of wondering how it will go down between Leclerc and Hamilton, who I also think are team players. I think it's been quite a weird one. And Sainz has, where Ocon never gets on with any teammates, and also Alonso doesn't. Whereas Sainz is like the opposite. Apart from Verstappen, he's gotten on with everyone.
You're trying to wind me up on Ocon, but I'm just not going to bite. I'm just not going to bite. He gets on fine with most of his teammates that aren't named Alonso.
But what a shame, I think, is the main thing. If you look back at Carlos Sainz's time at Ferrari, which is coming to an end now, I can totally sympathise with, well, this car is now going to the front of the grid, but ultimately, this is the game in Formula One. He had, how many years has he been at Ferrari? So he's had all that time to establish himself as number one. And we know Ferrari will switch their number ones based on who's doing better. With Massa and Raikkonen, they switched between those two in successive years. And then with Leclerc coming in and Vettel, they switched, and then on a dime, Leclerc was on top of Vettel. And you go, well, if Carlos Sainz had come in and had beaten Leclerc consistently, when it came to Hamilton coming, they would have replaced Leclerc with Hamilton. But he can't be too upset because he had the chance to be the one that was going to stay next year and ultimately didn't win that fight. Is that fair? I know, Matt, I know you're a Sainz fan. I know, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just saying I don't think
it's about that though. I think for Ferrari, it's about a chance to get Lewis Hamilton, not just for the now, but for the now and the forever future after he retires. He will be a Ferrari ambassador.
Yeah, but
they will fund him. And
why not keep Sainz then instead?
Because somebody has to go. And they chose Leclerc. And for a variety of different reasons, all of which are supportable. But when I look at the two of them as teammates, I think it will be hard for Hamilton to come in and be a better teammate than Sainz, even if he gets better results than Sainz. I guess that's what I'm going to say.
I think the question I'm left with is why? Why has Sainz looked so amazing some weekends, but for the majority of times, he has looked like he's second best to Leclerc on a Sunday? And I would love to know the answer. If I was just going to guess, like a pure guess, they all have their development strategy throughout a weekend. They all have choices for their setups. Does Carlos Sainz perhaps go for, maybe they're equally good drivers, but does Sainz go for setups that go like, oh, hang on, if I just go this setup, 1 time out of 6, I'm going to gain 2/10. Like, does he go for like riskier setups, or is he just better at certain types of track characteristics? But there has to be some kind of reason, Matt, why he can look he can look champion-esque in some races, but for most of the weekends, that's not the case.
Okay, so from memory, they have different optimal car characteristics that they prefer to drive to. So Leclerc likes the car slightly differently than Sainz does. And I think it's simple to say, well, on the whole, maybe the car has suited Leclerc a bit more because he is and has been their chosen one for quite some time. He's also been at the team far longer than Sainz. So Sainz walked into a car that was already going to be slightly suiting Leclerc better. But I also think it's simple to say, having seen him at enough different teams, that he has never had the raw pace of a Leclerc or a Hamilton or an Alonso. The thing that has made him formidable is he's unbelievably adaptable. So given a car that suits his teammate better, he will be closer to the teammate than anyone else on the grid. The car's pointy for Max. He would be closer to Max than anybody else on the grid in a car that was Max's car. That's one thing. And the other thing, and he displayed that in Singapore using Norris to keep Russell off his back by using the DRS. He is one of the most thinking and smartest drivers on track in the moment. And he uses that to maximize his results. I have one more thing, and that is he is extremely consistent. And he uses that to his advantage week in and week out. And that's what makes him so devastatingly good, even without being the fastest.
I think he's consistent in that he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. I would argue that his ultimate pace over the weekends isn't consistent. That's a point I would make. But
look at his lap times. That's what I would say.
But I mean, if you're consistent but behind, that's not like a good thing, is it? And most of the time he's behind on pace.
It is a good thing, because if you're inconsistent, then you lose more time and your tires go off and your brakes are like today. I know he had brake overheating. Did you know that? Nobody knew that. I just caught the radio message. That's how good he is at managing, because they say, we need you to add a tenth or take away a tenth. He can be like, okay. And he'll be very accurate with that. That's what I mean by consistent.
Oh, and also today, I don't know how relevant this is. So a lot of people were saying, okay, if Max hadn't held up Norris would have been able to catch up with Sainz. I think that Ferrari had a lot in hand. Are we agreeing?
Yeah, we're agreeing.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The first stint of the Ferraris, Norris couldn't touch it. And I will tell you that between the time when Max pitted on lap 27 and when Sainz pitted on lap 33, or Norris pitted on lap 31, he lost almost another 4 seconds to Sainz at the front. The first stint pace, particularly of Sainz, because Leclerc fell back too. First stint pace of Sainz was just blistering. And that's where Ferrari really made their race happen.
Yeah. So like in Barcelona last year when people were saying, oh yeah, if there was just a few more laps, Norris would have caught Verstappen. I think, Sainz was managing massively. Look, Connor's gone, well, there's nothing like a dominant win to make you pick apart all of a driver's flaws. It's a conversation. Relax slightly. We have said it's a dominant win and we have looked for reasons why he's not had more of these dominant wins. If you look at him compared to Leclerc today, he was criticizing Leclerc's general kind of race plan and saying, why is the gap closing? Why is the gap closing? Why is Leclerc pushing so hard? He was worried. And I think if you look at what happened in the race, Leclerc's tyres fell away because he was pushing to close the gap. But Sainz was able to not only save his tyres, but also go, why is he pushing so hard? Okay, I'll get ahead as well. But we shouldn't be doing this. And I think that also emphasizes, how much of a dominant weekend he's had. I think it's entirely fair to ask why that doesn't happen more often. I think that's fine. So, okay, before we go into the Mercedes and some any other businesses, I'd like to look at the championship math. So, Cristina, where do you stand now? Who's the favourite? Is the title chase still on?
For which title?
The drivers. Who cares about the other one? No one cares.
I care about both.
We can pretend. Okay, I'll pretend to care about the constructors after we talk about the actual good one.
I do still think that the drivers will go to Verstappen, just because even on a bad day, he can still consistently get ahead of so many people. Realistically, in order for him to fall back, other people need to pick up the pace. Today could have gone very differently if, say, the Mercedes actually had some ability to defend, and they really didn't. So Verstappen, at the end of the day, even if he's not doing as fabulously as he would like, he's still going to be able to put out good enough performances to keep a gap up. It's going to take a lot to pull him back or get him even within reach of Norris.
Well, you might remember I did some math a while ago. And that math was based on Norris needing 51 points in 6 races. He now needs 47 points in 4 races. So it's actually the amount of points he needs per race has gone up, or per race weekend, because there's some sprints coming up. It's gone up, and that's not going to help his odds in the slightest. What I would say is, I think Norris is at the point where he needs to win or be second with Max out of the points or DNF.
Yeah.
For this to be a realistic conversation.
I think a DNF now is more on the cards. So, okay, so let's go through some maths where you wouldn't need a DNF. And I still stand by last week that Article 33.4 more than covers that you're not allowed to just, lob a grenade just because you're the car that's being overtaken. There's
show me the rule against grenades. I don't see
exactly.
The rule book. Sorry.
Let's look on the SkyPad and look. There's no rule against grenades. It only says that the overtaking car can't throw grenades. Oh, come on. No, the rules more than cover that you can't just drive a car off track and then not accelerate, so they get a penalty for. It's ridiculous. So to me, that's a 6-point swing. So what's the gap now, Matt? What's the gap? 47? 47. 47. Okay. So I'm going to take 6 off for the Spanners maths. So that's 41, right? So 3-point swing either way. It's a double header on that one. And then we go Monza. That was 10 points, wasn't it? Because if you should have called Piastri off, should have stopped Piastri from overtaking Norris into turn 4. By that point,
I see. We're going back into the season to see where Norris accidentally left all his points. Oh, okay. All right. Gotcha now.
No. I'm just saying, look, these are tangible things. Like McLaren could have called off Norris, Piastri by Monza. Of course they could have done. And yet, look, Webber apparently is going off to have negotiations with Red Bull. Apparently that's happened. Webber is trying to get in chats for Piastri to Red Bull. So, oh well, we were trying to not upset Piastri, and he's chatting to Red Bull anyway. They made him give up a win at Hungary where Norris was faster. He was faster. He was so fast. He was so much faster that they had to slow him down. He was pulling away from Piastri. He didn't have the pace, but they made him give up a win. So that's 7 points. So that 17. What's 41 minus 17? I can do that maths in my head. You can't prove I can't.
25.
20. Matt,
24.
Matt, you
Sorry,
didn't need
24.
to say I was there. I knew 24. We were all doing it. So the gap could be 24. Like it could easily be 24, but it's not. It's 47. So now, I do agree with you. Now it's going to take a DNF or an engine penalty. So, for example, how close do you think we are to Max getting some kind of grid penalty for getting a new engine?
Close.
No telling. Absolutely no telling.
I feel like it must be close. Like, by the numbers, he's on the cusp. If he takes a new one, he gets a penalty, correct? Any new part.
Yes. So if he takes an ICU now, 10 place.
Yeah.
And then there's 2 other things that make it a 5 place. So if it's Matt knows this. Come on, Matt.
What? Do you want me to comment? Does he need a new ice? No, the problem that he had on Friday was with a leaking turbo inlet, and they fixed that. But I'm pretty convinced that they've taken their worst engine, and that's just the Friday engine, and they're going to run it till it goes pop to save the others, because he did have to take an extra one back at Spa. But even that, and this is the problem that I have. The problem is the point structure outside of the gap from first to second is really very small. There's 3 points from second to third, and then it's just 2 points between each space. So he needs like 5 places on Max. Yeah. Max got a 20. Max sat long enough to order a margarita in his pit box today. Finishes 6th, which is the worst, matches his worst finish of the entire season, except for the one race he didn't finish at all. It's really going to have to be something going wrong with the car, or him just getting plowed into by a driver, taking him out fully for Norris to have a chance. Because he needs a big chunk of points taken off what he has to earn to give him a realistic shot at this championship. But it's Formula One and it's racing, and these things, they do happen. They're much rarer now, but they do happen.
So there's a couple of spoilers. So basically, Ferrari's form is killing Norris. So if Ferrari hadn't got that form and they could slot themselves handily between Norris and Verstappen, that would really help. The Mercedes are a bit of a wild card still, because I do think the Mercedes could roll the dice and end up ahead of Verstappen on pace, but the odds on that are low to me, because I've been watching them for the last few years and paying attention, and every update seems to be random, and who knows what is going on with this current upgrade package.
Go ahead, ask me a question you don't want to know the answer to.
Will Mercedes overtake Red Bull?
No, they won't. But I was going for the, hey, Max had a 20-second penalty. Did anyone bother to look at how far behind he finished and see where he would have finished without that penalty? And guess what? I did. He would have finished 4th. Yeah, and his car wasn't great this weekend. We can all agree. Like, he was struggling this weekend very clearly. Yeah, according to him on the radio.
And then Piastri's, but Piastri's another issue. Like, what's Piastri doing? Right, okay.
Well, they told him not to get in the way of Norris, and so he's just followed directions. So malicious compliance.
Right, okay. So I think, like, if you look at the trend from last season and go, well, Piastri showed moments of brilliant one-lap pace, but generally, anytime tyre wear was an issue, he wasn't there. This year, it went through a phase where for about 3 or 4 races, you go, oh, no, he's the real deal. He's right up there. But if you look at the context of the whole season, I don't know if I'm being harsh, Cristina, but if you look at the context of the whole season, I think overall he's where he was last season, and he's not supporting Norris. And I don't know if Matt's suggestion that it's on purpose is real.
No, I would
mostly
doubt.
humor.
Yeah. Look, as much as we notice, okay, yeah, that they're both pretty much the same age and that they do at times get very similar results, Norris has still been in Formula One for 5-6 years at this point, and this is Piastri's 2nd. And all of those years of experience do make a difference. As much as Piastri has been hitting the ground running and has been doing a phenomenal job, there's still a lot of finesse that he can learn, and he's going to learn it so well. It's going to be brilliant to watch, but there is a reason why Norris is up there fighting at the front. And you do hope that as well. This is the weekend that they brought their new floor, isn't it? McLaren brought the new floor this weekend. So I also think that we're looking at a car that might just need a little bit more settling into because it's a new floor, it's Mexico, air density, let's say it for the 12 millionth time this week. So a bit of a strange weekend, I think, for McLaren and for a lot of the teams in general, but good that Norris got some points.
Okay, but it's not over. It's not over. I think, yeah, a bad rate, a really bad rate. I know what you're getting at, Matt. There's a brutal consistency with Verstappen not out driving the car. That's wrong. Getting the most out of the car while others fall away. And so I know we've just got some criticism in the chat there for getting at Carlos Sainz, but if you look at the next 4 races, do you reliably think that Carlos Sainz will be ahead of Verstappen at the end of a Sunday for the next 4 races? And I wouldn't necessarily bet on that, or you would? No, you're agreeing with me, Matt. I think, but yeah. So you go, that's not a given that Verstappen will put himself ahead of, that Sainz will put himself ahead of Verstappen. Piastri's form also doesn't look like he's putting himself ahead of Verstappen. The Mercedes form certainly doesn't look that way either. So you're kind of looking at Leclerc being Norris's rear gunner, but Leclerc is often faster than the McLarens at the moment. So yeah, I'm starting to agree. We need a DNF for Norris. Not that I'm a neutral. Just because I'm sat here in a Norris shirt, I don't think anyone should draw any conclusions from that.
Yeah, but we should be glad that we have the race, that the whole thing wasn't decided 3 or 4 races ago. That happened regularly in the 2010s. So the fact that there's a mathematical possibility makes it all worthwhile. And what I do think is true, and really the important thing here, is it seems that both Norris and Max think that Norris still has a real shot at this, and they're driving like it. And that is absolutely worth the price of admission right now.
All right. Since we mentioned Mercedes, weird battle, Cristina. I don't know. It just looks like a team trying to minimize their results as much as possible.
It wasn't a battle that particularly caught my attention, mostly because I knew that they're swapping positions and they're kind of in no man's land as far as competing with any of the other teams go. But it was nice to see both of them choosing their moments. It felt like it felt really calculated, and it felt like they were picking and choosing when they would be going. It was really nice. It was good wheel-to-wheel racing. Am I imagining something different? Why are your face scrunching up like that? Am I thinking of a different one?
No, I just got kind of a scrunchy face. So in the moment, I did like that when it ended up being Hamilton on the faster, basically with more tyres left at the end, and Russell having a bit of damage. So, and also Hamilton was on the new package, but then he had some floor damage from Colapinto crashing it in FP1. So there was a lot of factors that basically ended up with Hamilton had a faster car. Norris, why do I keep saying Norris? Russell defended really well. So his car placement was great, and Hamilton was very, very respectful, especially early on in that battle. So there were times where, he could have let off the brakes and just sent it into turn 1. He wasn't going to do that against George Russell. But then there was also a lot of times where they were overlapping through the middle section as well. And that was, respectful. It was good racing. And then you could kind of see that Russell's tyres were going. And I know there's lots of mitigating circumstances, Matt, but like at the beginning of that battle, when Russell overtook Hamilton at the beginning in the first stint, he said, please tell George it's a long race. So he was kind of pulling a Carlos Sainz thing there. But that is the pattern we've seen. And I think that was before damage. And he goes, yeah, tell Russell it's a long race, i.e., why are we burning our tyres going for it? And that's the same thing that we've criticised Russell for all season long.
Yeah, and I think that's, in general, it is a trend that you will see with younger drivers. Now, Russell has clearly made great strides.
Russell's like 30. What are you on about?
In his tire, younger
30
relative.
is so young, Spanners. What are you on?
Oh, says 29. You wish 30 was young.
I don't know. I when I say younger, I'm comparing him to like Hamilton's or, Sainz, people who've been in the sport much longer than him. He's gotten better at it.
Oh, he's 26. Oh, dear.
He's gotten better at it, but it's very clear based on what happened in the second stint. If you allot that more or less their cars are pretty similar, if not exactly the same, that Hamilton still has a better feel, particularly I think for the rear tires. And he just gradually waited for Russell to run out of enough tire that he could take advantage of it. And I was actually impressed how many laps in a row that he stayed within a second of him and still had enough tire to make that overtake the way that he did. Because I was, again, sorry, I'm going to say Amanda because she's sitting next to me on the couch now, but I remarked to her at the time, I was like, it's really, it's a challenge to do that and to do it that well, that late in the race.
So an interesting thing from Hamilton was saying that they decided to take front wing out at the beginning of the race, and that felt like a mistake. So obviously he's sitting there without a pointy front end. They changed that at the pit stop, and then he felt a lot better. My real concern out of this is because I'm sort of disregarding Hamilton's season and going, well, he's talking about every race as an extended test session. He seems to be wanting to do the job for Mercedes. He's being paid. Like, he might be quiet quitting in some ways, but he is still being paid. So if they say, okay, we're setting up Russell for the race and you're just going out there and let's see what you can do with the new package and let's gather data, which was his main aim for the race. Finish the race, gather data. Such lofty ambitions. The concern here would be if Russell's the lead driver next year and Antonelli has a Hamilton-like pace, are they going to continue letting George Russell hold up Antonelli? So it doesn't matter that Russell has been holding up Hamilton this season. So he's had the lower downforce set up in qualifying more often than not. So yes, you can get ahead, but that compromises your race pace, but you're ahead, so you can hold up Hamilton. You can do an interesting different strategy. You can make sure you go long or do something to prioritize track position. If he does that against Antonelli, I don't think they're going to be as sympathetic as him doing it to a Hamilton that is leaving. That's my concern for Mercedes going forward, is that at the moment, over the last 2 years, the way Russell has driven has meant that both of those cars aren't maximizing their pace.
Because they oftentimes are the only people in their time slot, and so they wind up fighting each other. Yeah,
but also they're running alternative strategies that are incompatible with each other. If they were able to ghost past each other, it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, and if that's agreed upon ahead of time, a lot of times the drivers will pick different strategies and they'll work it out in advance that when they're on the fresh tires and you're on the old tires, you just let them go. No one really has an argument with that. But I find your Antonelli point an interesting one in the abstract. If he really does have more pace and isn't just going to burn up his tires, then Mercedes will consider it to be an issue if and only if they think he has a pace to catch the next car up the road. Because otherwise, it doesn't matter to them who finishes ahead, which one finishes first and which one finishes second. They get the points for the both of them finishing next to each other, if you know what I'm saying. And frankly, half the time they're probably going to be pulling Antonelli out of a wall anyway. He's a rookie in a very fast car in the sharp end of the field, and he himself admits that it's a bit nerve-wracking. So that's just a normal thing with rookies.
Oh, man.
And I think it will be less of an issue. I want it to be an issue, but I'm afraid it may not be as much of one as we'd like it to be.
They're going to be spending time pulling Antonelli out of a wall. Matt Trumpets, 2024 prediction for 2025. So we've had a Mexican Grand Prix that was entertaining. We had battles for the leads. We had teammates scrapping with each other. What more do you want? Are we going to keep dismissing the Mexican Grand Prix just because it happens to be very high above the sea and has an almost willfully destructive stadium section layout for overall racing. But look, people were predicting a boring race with no overtaking. Yet this regulation of cars, this regulation set, is producing good racing at nearly every circuit we go to. We are in for a thrilling 2025 before we then decide, nope, enough of that. Let's tear up the regulations and have one team dominate randomly again in 2026. But we've got at least 14 months of excitement up ahead. And we also have the Brazilian Grand Prix coming up on a sprint weekend. It's one of the greatest events in Formula One history. I absolutely love Interlagos. It is a track that it promotes fantastic racing. It's historic. It has action and it has a chance of precipitation as well. What's not to look forward to at Interlagos? Let's give out our awards. So let's start with the negative thing so we can end with a bad thing. So this is the Missed Apex Award.
Oh no, you missed the apex.
Right. Well, Matt, you keep mentioning your wife, and it could be because you have love for your spouse. You've built a life together, raised a child, and have a bond that even penguins envy. I think penguins, they're very close to their spouses.
You should see how many pebbles she has.
Or it could be because you're shilling her book and you want to retire and buy a Ferrari. So let's shill her book. Go.
Fast and the Reckless, Formula One Romance,
Mucky book.
available at all of your favorite booksellers online or in the real life. Barnes & Noble, airport bookstores, Target, Walmart. Just go. There will be a link in the show notes. Just hit it up. And I will point out we are headed towards some gift giving seasons. So makes a great gift for those people who like to read those sorts of novels. And they might even wind up watching Formula One with you.
I think it might be a more realistic portrayal of F1 in fiction than what I saw of the F1 movie filming. And it was Brad Pitt running around with a Mexican flag. Had his gloves on post-race, which annoyed Brad because, that's the first thing you do. You get out of a car, you take your gloves off so you can take your helmet off and all the rest of the stuff. But also, he was celebrating and running around in much the manner that a 60-year-old man would run. It did not look like an athlete in his prime.
So basically like me. Yeah, okay.
Wait, or me as well. Like, it's not if you put me in that scene, I'm not going to realistically be bouncing around like a Leclerc, am I? But anyway, look, the camera angles might make it all seem better. I'm still reasonably optimistic for that F1 movie. So, Matt, who missed the apex for you? By the way, links for Amanda's book will, of course, be in the show notes below.
I mean, I kind of hate to say it. I'm thinking about it, and just really, it's the same week in and week out at this point. It's just the kick Sauber out the race team. I mean, I looked, for one of the things I do for the show notes is I go every week and I get the drivers' championship. Do you know who is dead last in the drivers' championship right now?
Bottas.
He's behind Logan Sargent.
Oh my God.
I mean, yes, for reals, he is, and he deserves better. I think Formula One deserves better, and I know the people in the team are trying. So if you're actually on the team, please don't take this as a personal criticism of you. It's all got to do with the corporate shenanigans and the funding above your head.
Yeah, Matt is saying that now, but privately, he was saying to me, basically everyone at Sauber is a bunch of mugs and I hate them all individually and personally. That's what he was saying. I've got a WhatsApp proof. He sent me a WhatsApp.
Oh God, are we going to play this? You're going to spell tires with a Y again when you do this, aren't you? Yeah.
I'm not using a fake WhatsApp thing to besmirch Matt. But no. It's definitely a symptom of the franchise model of Formula One. We are going to keep seeing this. We are going to keep seeing zombie outfits, which is, I don't think that's too harsh. Sauber's currently a zombie outfit.
Absolutely right. Yeah, nobody wants to spend money on it, but
they can't sell because you need to have the money. Yeah, because it's the franchise. All right, we have got Christina Lee Mace next up for our Miss the Apex Award. Christina, the best thing you do in motorsport is your pre-race bullet, where it's even me. I'm old and ugly, and I've been watching F1 since the 80s. tune into that and see things like, right, expected tyre wear, DRS zones, what to expect from the race. And you do that primarily on your TikTok.
That is correct. That is where she lives.
At Cristina Talks About Cars.
Cristina.fastcars.
Cristina.fastcars. And you also do that in association with motorsport.com?
Yes, with motorsport.com, we have a series called Learning Curves. And that one, it's a bit more of an in-depth look at one specific feature at a given track. And that's on their Instagram and TikTok.
So go and follow you. Obviously, we'll put the links in the show notes below. Cristina at fast.cars. No, come on, help me out. Just say it again.
Cristina.fastcars.
And on Instagram, you are?
Christina Lee Mace.
There we go. Go and follow Cristina there. Cristina, who missed the Apex for you?
I feel like it's low-hanging fruit, but you have to say it. Perez. Just start to finish. This weekend could have been mediocre instead of the absolute, you thought it couldn't get worse. Well, wait a minute. Challenge accepted that it turned out to be. So definitely would have loved for him to have a bit more of a lively home race, especially given that it's potentially his last one. So
he says not, and his dad says not.
Well, if Daddy says so.
Do me a favor, ask me where I can be found and the stuff I do.
Oh my goodness, Spanners. Where can people find you? You're the best one. Obviously, they want to follow you. Where? Don't make them ask again. Don't make them guess and search. Where?
Top F1 TikTokers are saying I'm the best one. So you should go and follow me on Twitter at SpannersReady. Instagram, I was posting a lot on there when I was briefly doing interesting things, but now I'm not doing anything interesting. But I promised to post inane photos of me again. I tried to do threads, not really doing that very well, but also on Facebook as Richard Reddy. But the primary thing you can do to help me out is to give it a go, support us on Patreon, join our great Discord community, and you can get an ad-free feed as well by going to patreon.com/Missed Apex. My Missed Apex award is going to go to Piastri. I think he has dropped the ball over the last couple of races. And in that qualifying session, I know he got a lap time deleted, but that lap time wouldn't have been enough to go through anyway. And then he made a couple of attempts. And so not all the blame is on him, because then he did another lap that wasn't quick enough. And they seem to inexplicably make the decision to just have a cool down lap and charge the battery instead of coming in. So they obviously had fuel in the car. So all they had to do was come in and get tires and then go again. But just all weekend, it looked like he didn't have the pace. So he was having to over push to try and make up for that and then making mistakes. But look, you've got one of the hottest cars in Formula One right now. And if we're going to criticize Perez in the third best car for going out in Q1, then I think Piastri also has to take a little bit of that flack as well. Now we get to do the thing of the weekend. Let's be all positive. All right, Matt, what was your thing of the weekend?
Well, I'd very much like to say it was Carlos Sainz, because I'm a huge fan. But actually, it was Haas. Double points. We didn't even talk about it during the show.
No, talk about it now.
But especially Kevin Magnussen on his way out, nabbing a P7. That was very chef's kiss, if you know what I mean. It was very nice.
Yeah, it was great. And of course, they're doing a great thing in getting rid of both drivers and having a fresh driver lineup for next season. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, actually, I'm actually kind of delighted, because there's a long-term connection between Komatsu and Ocon coming in. So I'm greatly encouraged by the form they have displayed and by what Komatsu has done with the team. Because there were plenty of people convinced that they were not capable of what they've shown this season. And with Toyota coming on board too, they could be something to watch next season.
Maybe. I've got a fear that we might be being fooled by out of sync updates. That is my only fear, that with other teams in their realm, like maybe the Williamses and who else is it back there? But, say Williams, for example, are going, right, we've now switched to 2025. That's where I'm kind of a little bit concerned. We go, have Haas just kind of, gone out of sync and they're showing a bit of potential, but will it last into the season? But to completely argue with myself straight away, we were all sat there at Miami when the Haases were holding up Hamilton. So there we go.
And they're ahead of RB. They're 10 points up on RB now. So they're like solidly in 6th place in the Constructors' Championship.
Tina, Macy, what was your thing of the weekend?
My thing of the weekend is karma. I just really enjoyed the fact that it finally came around. Drive stupid, get stupid prizes. It was very satisfying. And it was one of those things that's a long time coming. We're all looking at it. We're all looking at the style of driving and just going, everyone's kind of fed up with this. The drivers are fed up. Team principals and all the fans. So it was nice just to see 20 seconds and just going, yeah, that was very well deserved. Yes.
I mean, you could have said stewards as well.
No, just karma.
Just
karma.
I am going to go. I don't know. It's tough because in a way, like last week when Matt told me that Ferrari had no upgrades and they could have just been doing that the whole time, I've got a similar approach with Carlos Sainz because you go, whoa, how does he do a performance like that? And he's not just doing it all the time. I think we'd all love that for Carlos Sainz to do it all the time. But I think it's difficult to go outside of that. So Carlos Sainz 4 suddenly in race 17 of a 24 race season. What race is this? Do you know what I mean? Like we're right in the back end of the season to suddenly pull out a dominant weekend like that. You could argue that is, well deserved and possibly a swan song, possibly a cap that he'll look back on and say, well, in the back end of my time with Ferrari, I went and won the Mexican Grand Prix. Thank you very much for tuning in to Missed Apex Podcast. I hope you will tune into our midweek content because we are getting much, much better at just jumping online with one or two of us in the week and answering your questions. So last week we did a great things that you reckon, and we had voice notes that were left in our Patreon Discord as well. So we hope that that's something that you guys will appreciate or have appreciated. And if you want to get involved in that, patreon.com/missedapex, or you can email me anytime, spanners@missedapex.net. Any abuse can go to matt@missedapex.net as well. And we will see you when we see you. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. You can identify the exact moment I was looking for the button there, and that's a flaw in my skill level.
I'm just impressed you're still conscious this late.
It's 2:15 a.m. right now. I did have a nap earlier. Don't cry for me.
Colapinto.
Don't cry for me, Colapinto. Does that count as political? Bye.